Hello everyone, what is up? It's me, Ewan. This is Josh Brown, and we're here today to talk to you about a little thing that's been causing a little bit of a stir in the movie ecosphere the past week, and that is the Beatles biopic extravaganza experience thing.
4-film cinematic event. I'll have you know it's
cinematic event, yes. If you aren't aware, Sam Mendes is cooking up a big old Beatles brotherhood thing. It's coming out in 2028, April 7th. 4 movies the same day about each member of the Fab Four, with Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr, and John Lennon. And we've got Paul Mescal as Paul McCartney. I believe they cast him because he's also called Paul.
That's how it works, yeah.
Harris Dickinson as John Lennon. Joseph Quinn as George, the best. And then also Barry Keoghan as Ringo Starr.
Of course.
And they released the images for the 4 last week, courtesy of LIPA, which is the Liverpool Performing Arts School over in Merseyside. And yeah, I have thoughts.
Come on, because I want to hear what you think about this, because I am a recent Beatles fan. I actually kept away from their entire oeuvre for the longest time, and it was only when Peter Jackson's Get Back documentary dropped that I really got the Beatles for the first time. So this is obviously an ambitious cinematic event. Like you said, 4 films dropping on the same day is crazy. We know they're filming it throughout the entirety of 2026, essentially, and the first look has been a little bit divisive, to say the least. I do think they're all incredible actors, and what's interesting to me is that the one guy that I wasn't sure of, purely based on looks, I think he's the best actor of the lot of them, was Paul Mescal. I just didn't see him as Paul McCartney. And then, after these official images dropped, he was the only one where I thought, I see the vision now.
Yeah,
that's worked out much better than I expected.
He does look like Paul. It's really good. And to be honest, I think my big issue with these casting choices, I think a lot of people at the time, I am a big Beatles guy. I'm from Liverpool. I love Wings especially as well. It's my favorite Beatles-related thing. Obviously, you know, George Harrison's solo career as well is amazing. But I think the big thing coming from this is that everyone was kind of like, yeah, I think they've just cast because they're the name guys. They're the name guys. Everyone, you know, Paul Mescal's and everything. He's just been in Gladiator 2. He's been in Hamnet as well. Yep. You know, Barry Keoghan, obviously huge after, you know, the post-Saltburn hype. We got Joseph Quinn, who's just been doing the rounds in Fantastic Four. And then Harris Dickinson, who I'm actually not familiar with. What was he?
He's the one that's also the least familiar for me as well. Yeah. I'm not actually familiar with much of Harris Dickinson's work, which is kind of exciting, I think, overall.
So yeah, the main criticism I have with this project since it was announced, and I kind of find it really frustrating, Sam Mendes' career post-2012 Olympics has very much felt like he's an ambassador for British pop culture, right?
That's such a good point.
And I think my big frustrations as a big Beatles fan and a big fan of the stylings of Paul McCartney is that we can't expect to hear temporary secretary in a movie project that looks this sanitized. For me, this looks like it's just kind of going for, you know, we're going to get them all in and we're going to have the same aesthetic baseline. And I hate to give the MCU some strays on this one, but it kind of feels like if Marvel were going to do a movie about the Beatles, you'd expect the same visual styling, the same kind of... I think it's very frustrating when you think of the Beatles' own cinematic legacy between like stuff like A Hard Day's Night, you know, Submarine, everything else, for them to hone in on just one aesthetic choice. And you know, it could be more expressive, it could be that. But I think what's most crushing about all of this as well, apart from the subject matter being very near and dear, is the fact that like we had a couple really, really good music biopics recently in Rocket Man, Elvis, Better Man as well.
Better Man was great.
Yeah.
Better Man was really good.
All of those movies took big swings with their creative choices for artists that it made sense to do. You know, Elvis is literally a like mad visual experience as a performer, so it made sense to get Baz Luhrmann in to just do Baz Luhrmann-y things. And then obviously Robbie Williams, it was a really cool, you know, creative swing that they took with that. And Rocket Man, they had Elton John's involvement, but they really went kind of visually all over the place with everything like that. But then we had stuff like A Complete Unknown from James Mangold of Walk the Line fame, which is a movie I only recently watched and did not care for, which is a shame.
It's like the template for all music biopics going forward. Right?
And I feel like what makes this even worse is not just the fact that it feels like it's aiming for that kind of... And again, we haven't even seen the trailer for this. We've just seen 4 images or whatever. but it kind of feels like it's aiming for that Walk the Line-esque feel, which feels like double folly when you consider that Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story, already did the Beatles and that as well.
It's tough, man. Like, yeah, I'm the leader of the Beatles, John.
It's me, John Lennon.
No, it's interesting that you mentioned that. I watched recently a video by the great Patrick H. Willems.
I watched that video too.
Did you really?
Yeah, it's a good one.
And he was mentioning there about like the weird fork in the road we're at with musical biopics. Are we going to go down the route that's a little bit more interesting, that's seen those creatively vibrant works like Rocketman, like Better Man, or are we starting to see a turn towards the more conventional, the kind of more conservative, here is a sanitized version of this artist's life, like the ones that you mentioned, of course. And with this, I feel like you're going to miss a trick if you don't emphasize that at least visual creativity alongside the dramatical musical changes that happened to the Beatles like over the years. And when I look at these photographs, I think, and I hope, and I'm optimistic that if you have 4 different movies, you can do 4 different eras. And I just think it would be really cool, I don't know if they're going to do this, to see an actor appear in all 4 of these films. Let's say Paul Mescal, and say his film is focused on the earlier years of Paul McCartney, but to then have him show up in, say, the John Lennon one that might take place in the late 70s, and you get that older version of Paul. That would be interesting to me. Whether they pull that off and make it distinct, or they want to cohere to that more conventional biopic style, I don't know, but you've got 4 films. Go mad with it,
This is the frustrating thing about it as well, because I think fundamentally, as a biopic, it's difficult as well, because we were talking about the cinematic legacy of the Beatles. Like you mentioned Get Back earlier on, which is a fantastic documentary, but you think of that whole, that whole era, that story has already been narrativized so well through a visual medium. Like, it's so iconic that to then try and make it cinematic in your own way feels almost a little bit redundant at this point. And I think the other thing for me as well is like you're going in on 4 Beatles, 4 very talented performers, obviously. But if I were to do a project about the Beatles, I would probably make Paul the focal point and maybe go into the whole, because I think you can track the legacy of the Beatles through Paul McCartney better than you can through each of them individually. And that's obviously down to the fact that he was the lead creative figurehead on the group when it was, through its original era. And then you also have stuff like Wings, you have his own solo career, and I think it's more interesting to track the different eras of the band, both, before the breakup, that's creation, whatever, all the way through to, the tragedies that involve, John Lennon, George Harrison passing away at a young age as well. So I think you have to see it through that lens would be more compelling to me than trying to do it all individually. And I don't know, it feels a little bit like it feels like icky tourism. There's good, there's a difference in like good Beatles historiography and kind of cultural kind of examinations, and getting a really annoying cliche surface level piece of tat, and looking at this right now and the motivations behind the project and the talent that it's procured and the images that they've chosen to go with as this first one right now, this feels like a bit of tat and not something that is really speaking to the Beatles as an entity.
Dude, that's a great point. I want to just kind of like double down on that idea. You've eloquently put what I've been wrangling with so many years. When Get Back came out and I was flirting with the idea of watching it and then ultimately was getting into the Beatles, I had this conversation with Adam Nicholas over on a What Culture Wrestling podcast. And I was saying why I never got the Beatles initially was because I only ever saw the Beatles as the institution, the iconography, that reflection of Britain or whatever it was. And it felt very hollow and surface level to me. And the only time I ever saw any of these obviously iconic people as people was that documentary, and I was like, oh, this is kind
these
of
guys,
stripping.
these dudes rock.
These are way more interesting than I gave them credit for. It isn't just that mythologizing that Britain does so much around like these figures. I was interested in them as people, as creatives, and I need this film to tap into that rather than to do what you said there and just have it be almost an ambassador for the Beatles brand.
Yes, that is definitely a thing that I that's the big concern with this, I think. And I think with Sam Mendes, going back through like Skyfall, James Bond, British institution, going through there, it just kind of feels like he's he's stuck in an ambassadorial role, and those interesting big swings that he took kind of towards the beginning of his career, it doesn't feel like the right person for this job. And again, I do also kind of have to say there's a new Paul McCartney documentary coming out later this month called Man on the Run, which is all about his perspective from the dissolution of the Beatles through to his early days with Wings. It's obviously a riff on Band on the Run. Yeah. You should listen to Wings. I keep on telling you, you should go listen to Wings.
It took me 25
years
you need
to get on the Wings hype, man.
You know,
you've not lived if you haven't heard Jet. It's a great song. But I feel like that in itself, these guys are just so cinematic that I think anyone attempting to riff on that, it feels like a case where the personality is almost too large. And obviously, you know, with someone like Elvis, who was involved in the movies, you could maybe have made the same argument, but they found a unique visual in there with the story of his relationship with his manager and the idea of exploitation, the music industry, or whatever, and looking at Elvis as a tragic figure. The Beatles have been so, you know, documented, so heavily portrayed, so heavily parodied. Like, I go back to, like, The Simpsons, like the B Sharps episodes, and, you know, George Harrison, what a nice fella. You know, all this stuff, it's completely, we've already done all of this. What are we getting from this? I don't know.